Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Discussing a Murder. This is Jeff Jones. With me today is the full panel. So let's start from the top and introduce everybody and welcome Big Jeff first. Hey, Big Jeff, how are you doing today, buddy?
Hey, Jeff, Happy New Year to you and to everybody else on the panel and everybody in chat. It's going to be a very interesting year, I think, with regard to the case. Still looking forward to the potential ruling on the state's response as to whether or not we'll get any type of evidentiary hearing, and to see where we may have to go from that ruling. I think it ought to be a year filled with activity, and it always is kind of a hurry up and wait situation with the case. So looking forward to it. And as we continue to sort of dissect the state's argument, that's probably the big fun that we're going to have as we move forward. So thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to a good strong new year with my friends.
Well, happy New Year to you too, Big Jeff. Let's make it a fantastic one. And a happy New Year to you, Jack.
Happy New Year. Happy 2023. First and foremost, I want to say that I'm not addicted.
We believe you, Jack 61. Of course you're not addicted.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. This year, hopefully we're not going to have to wait too long for Judge Angie to make a decision, let Kathleen reply, whatever she's going, or amend her filing. So hopefully that's going to come relatively soon, and hopefully we don't have to wait too long in between one another, because it does put us kind of in a lull mode. But it does give us a chance to, re-examine what we already have, continue to request, open records request and that kind of thing. And you never know what we'll find. You just never know. We're not exhausted. We still don't have everything that I think that we can get that might have some relevance to the case. So looking forward to that. And hey, looking forward to moving on with our project here. So let's do it.
Thank you, Jack. And Dr. Silkman, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and Happy New Year to you and all the fellow panel members and everyone in chat. It's great to be here. New year. Hopefully things are going to be great for the boys, and hopefully we can see them finally come home and get justice for them, justice for Teresa and her family. Yeah, really looking forward to continuing our project, as Jack 61 said. Let's get it done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Silkman. And last but not least, Kelly, good morning. How are you doing? Welcome. And Happy New
Good
Year.
morning. Thank you. Happy New Year to everyone in the panel. Happy New Year to everyone in the chat. My New Year started shit. I woke up with COVID. This is what I did. I just tripled the dose of vitamin C, and bang, I was good as gold. But besides that, it's good to be back and can't wait to get started and possibly even finish maybe this episode today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Kel, for those comments, and let's get right to it.
So, starting we kind of told them what I told you. You guys can try to okay. Tell me where you want to go. Yeah, let's go first to where he is when he I never know.
I can't remember exactly what they're doing other than talking to Redant. I think that's right.
And trying to get an idea of where he was when he saw the fire and everything else.
Yeah. So like where we left off in the last episode, she was on the drive up to go to see Redaunt, and they talked about choosing the location, and the location was at the deer camp. And I think the other lawyer had asked Kathleen, like, what's a strange place to meet? And she said, no, it was her decision to meet at the deer camp. She wanted to meet there. And I think partially is they wanted to collect their own video footage. They, as the lawyers, wanted to get their feet on the ground in this location and familiarize themselves with the locations. I think it's a multi-pronged purpose to go and meet him at the deer camp. It takes him, right to where he was. I think it's a really good choice by Kathleen Zellner to set the meeting at the deer camp where they did.
Yeah, it certainly was. I agree, guys. The other important thing that we mustn't forget is that Josh Redaunt had legal representation with him. Now, isn't that very interesting? I mean, Josh Redaunt, obviously, where his deer camp was, and what Jack 61 said, the deer camp is just off Cuss Road. It's such in a critical position because it's very, very close to the Avery salvage yard. And we know that around the deer camp and at Cuss Road, it was a hive of activity, right, guys? It was certainly a place of interest. There was a lot of course, we'll talk about it after, there was a lot of activity at the so-called burial site just off Cuss Road. There was a lot of activity by the dogs, and there certainly were a lot of detectives and other law enforcement officers at Cuss Road. So it's interesting that Josh Redaunt had legal representation with him. Isn't that amazing?
I think that was probably wise on his part to to do that. I mean, I think we're going to learn later that Teresa's roommate, actually, declined to interview Scott Bladord. Actually declined after accepting to meet with Kathleen Zellner. Was advised by his attorney to not meet at all. So, I'm not surprised that he did do it because you never. I mean, Kathleen is going to, in her mind, formulate a person. We know that, for example, that Redaunt was, and I forget the exact terminology she used, but sort of person of interest number 1 or 2 or 3. She didn't name people in her possible narratives, but it did indeed turn out that Josh Redaunt was one of these people who she happened to, what's the right word, sort of mentally exonerate or verbally exonerate in her mind after this interview. So I thought it was smart on his part to talk to Kathleen and to bring an attorney at the same time. So that's my favorite.
Yep, 100% agree. But it's very, very interesting that Kathleen Zellner did consider Josh Redaunt as a person of interest. So it's, like I said, he happened to be in a very, very strategic spot. And I agree with you guys. It definitely was a good idea for Josh Redaunt to have legal representation with him. And we'll see that it's amazing how Josh Redaunt cleared everything with his attorney or what he could and couldn't say. Wise move.
But the interesting part...
go. Sorry.
Yeah, for me, the most interesting part is that, as far as I know, he didn't have a lawyer present with him when he spoke to law enforcement. So why have to have it present to have this meeting with Kathleen Zellner? And that's the only really prism that I can put that through, is to say he didn't have a lawyer speaking to law enforcement, but he wanted to have one in front of Kathleen Zellner. And so I think that's the way I see it, that, well, if you're that worried about it, saying the wrong thing, you're not in any legal jeopardy when in front of Kathleen Zellner at this point. She can't charge you with a crime. Law enforcement could. So why the posture? That's my only point for that.
It's a fair point. In this in this case especially, though. I mean, I think he was very, very prescient. Kathleen is look at her now. She's desperate to name a Denny suspect. So I think having his lawyer, you don't know what having his lawyer around may or may not have saved him. The reason he was
I mean,
on the list.
I'm with you. You should have a lawyer. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I agree with the decision he made to have his lawyer present. I just like to point out the fact that he didn't do that for law enforcement. Yeah,
That may have made him look guilty, right? I mean, so, because he was on the property the day before, right? And he came over to see the deer. Chuck Avery called him from Crivets to see what was going on.
I mean, it's his
because
brush
he was on
that's
the property.
supposedly right. His brush supposedly that was burnt in the fire. He's the one that first spotted the fire. So absolutely, he's connected to this.
So I was just wondering if you could put the map back up, because it is we don't always get this view, and it is kind of hard to see for people. Could you just point out the things that the landmarks that Dr. Silkman was just talking about? For example, Cuss Road, which is on that line on the top of the screen, and you can see it labeled Cuss Road. That was one thing I always wanted to have handy in front of me, and get these explanations. Where was Stevens? Where's County Road Q? How far is it from where they are? From where the RAV was discovered, sort of, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's good to point out the geography. As a matter of fact, as I'm looking at this map now, I feel like if I were going to, I would have given you wrong directions to Deer Camp, because I would have said that you go to the end of the Cuss Road and you have to take a left to get to the Deer Camp. It's obvious you have to take a right.
Talking about lawyers, and I'm switching gears just slightly, but speaking of people in the case that got lawyers, obviously for different reasons, but apparently, law enforcement and the prosecution considered Jody a real person of interest. And what did she eventually do in September of 2006 after they just continued to hound the hell out of her? She said, "I want my lawyer present for you guys, before I talk to you guys." So she brought her lawyer in there in that next interview.
Yeah, and then it changed after that, didn't it?
Starting, we kind of told them what I told you. You guys can try to look at. Okay, tell me where you want to go. Yeah, let's go first to where he is when he
Just to roll back here a second, there's a trailer missing at this point. At the time in 2005, there would have been a trailer right there, but it's gone. And I think it's important to mention, because if Stephen was moving a trailer, or if someone else was getting rid of property or tearing down sheds, I think it would be well noted. And I just think it's important to mention that fact, that if you look today, there's only 2 trailers, but at the time there was a red third trailer.
Yeah, the red trailer's gone.
And there is some confusion about a dog report, right? With regard to that, whether the red trailer they're talking about is Stevens' trailer or that trailer, right?
That's quite interesting. Both red trailer. Look at between in the straight in the center of the picture. Little path right there. I'm just saying, it looks like there's a little path to get out into the quarry, right behind where that red trailer would have been at the time.
Yeah, may I shoot video?
just so we can see it, because we'll never be able to remeasure this from there. So that's the conveyor route?
Yes, I think.
Here you can see, just pull ahead of here. Follow those poles right through into Avery's property.
I got
And see, that's one of the buildings of Avery.
Yes,
All right,
yes.
that's their latest building. That's the southeast side of their lot.
Okay.
Okay, pull ahead and show them where you went. So he's coming up here that day.
Yeah.
Yep. And I'm thinking it was like right in this area
Yeah.
Okay.
where I just I caught it on the corner of my eye.
Yeah.
I didn't stop or anything. kept driving. I didn't think anything of it.
Now, none of these little trees were here.
Okay, so that was clear out there, right?
It was clear and the berm wasn't built up.
Berm wasn't built up. So it's pretty much just straight, you can see. Okay, so when you draw this map,
Yep.
so that's where the area you're seeing the flame?
That was my guesstimation, yes.
Okay, so it's behind, like that's Avery's trailer. He's got that garage, and then his sister's place is right there. So it's behind it.
Just so you understand, he's guessing. He
Right.
doesn't see any barrel. He doesn't see any pit. He's guessing from his knowledge of where their buildings were. You know, roughly, this was his best guesstimate at that time.
When you give this statement, you actually go over there on the 5th, right, to give the statement?
Yep. We were up at the hunting ground.
Okay, and they came and
That's when
got you.
That's when they came and asked if we had seen anything.
Do the cops ever come back and ask you any more about that? Like when you saw it and
The fire you're saying?
yeah.
Sure, tell him.
They did, and actually I was getting frustrated at a point because it's almost as if they wanted me to change what I had actually seen.
Yeah.
And I said, "What kind of fire do you want me to tell you I saw?"
Did you get any sense what they want? Did they want you? Do you think say it was a bigger fire or?
Can I answer it?
Sure.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, because
I do, because by that time, I believe by that time there was so much on TV already about the bigger fire. In my opinion, I
they're
knew what
trying
they
to
were
make
trying
it
to get at.
fit.
So if you heard what Josh Redon said, right, he merely glanced in that direction. He probably spent, a fraction of a second, right? He didn't, he was driving. So he didn't go to that location just to see any particular fire. He had noticed smoke or something like that coming from that direction. There's absolutely no proof that it actually came from the Avery salvage yard, right? He just noticed some smoke. And as you can see from what we've seen in the video, he doesn't know whether it came from a burn barrel or whether it came from a fire pit. In fact, he's not even 100% sure it actually came from the Avery salvage yard, right? I would imagine there'll be other potential burn barrels or other burn sites around in the area. And what you can clearly see, the law enforcement officers pressured Josh Redon because what they were wanting him to do is to say that it was a big whopping fire, exactly like Mr. Kratz pushed Scott Tadich to say exactly the same thing, that it was a great big whopping fire. Because as you know, guys, if you're going to convert a human being to tiny bone fragments, you need a lot of fuel, you need a lot of time. And so it's amazing how the police, law enforcement, had pressured Josh Redon to change his statement from, hey, yeah, look, I just noticed the smoke, I noticed the fire, into making it into much bigger, much larger. So law enforcement are trying to pattern match and say, Stephen definitely had a fire.
Trying to layer it, right? If you will, right? Go ahead, Big Jeff. Sorry.
I was just going to say, is there really any difference between what they did with Redon and what they did with Scott Tadich? No. I mean, there's other aspects to Scott Tadich, but when you talk about the size of the fire, when he drops Barb off after visiting his mom in the hospital, oh yeah, when he first gets there, it was a small fire, but by the time it's shooting over the roof, by the time the trial comes, it's all because
the only difference is
exactly
that,
what Dr. Silkman.
Yeah. I think the only difference, Big Jeff, is that Redon doesn't go along with the exaggeration as much, and Scott Tadich kind of does go along with it and goes on, testifies that the flames were as high as the roof of the garage, or to that effect. So yeah, but I think you're spot on there, saying that they were trying to layer this approach and get more than one person to agree to the story, and then we can lock it in.
As I recall, Tadic's second statement, I'd have to reread this to be sure, but I'm fairly certain that one of the DCI agents brought up Barb about saying, Barb said something about you saw a fire, and then he said, well, I can't remember. If that's what she said or something of that nature. I have to go back and re-listen. I really wish that interview had been recorded. That would be fantastic.
100% correct, Jack 61. But what we note is that the fire kept on getting bigger, right, Jack 61? Initially,
oh, absolutely.
Initially, when they spoke with Scott Tadich, he never mentioned a fire, and then somehow someone must have prompted him about a fire, and you think about this, right? Josh Redaunt reported seeing a fire on the 5th, right? So he's the very first person to link a fire in the direction of the Avery salvage yard on the very same day that the RAV4 was found.
Fit that, yeah.
In my gut, I didn't see it.
What I'm thinking is, if we show you our map where the pelvic bones were supposedly found.
The bottom one is 2005, so hopefully that'll give you an idea of where those are located.
That's County's property.
Is it?
This one is certainly Manitowoc County.
So that's Manitowoc. And from there, they could have sneaked over, don't you think, to the conveyor road?
Sure.
I mean, that would be pretty
We'll show you the
simple.
road. You can come right up the road. You can come here
Yeah,
and come right up this way.
do it that way.
So these yellow posts are the property line between ours
Oh,
and
okay.
Manitowoc County.
And so the bones in the back.
Yeah, I believe they're south and east of here.
So looking at the
Yeah.
picture there,
Yeah,
there was a road right there.
yeah,
You can't really see it anymore, but it was in this general area.
okay,
You could see where the tubes were.
yeah,
That's blocked off now, but at the time you could drive right through.
okay.
Obvious thing is that since Kathleen Zellner visited Josh Redaunt, the actual geography and landscape of that entire area is very different now, totally different. So a lot of the landmarks that were present in 2005 are no longer present. So it's hard to get a handle on all the orientations and directions.
That's right. That's
But
right.
certainly, yes, that's right, Jack 61. And certainly there was a direct access, a back road through the cornfield, right, Jack 61, from Cuss Road.
He just said that.
Yeah.
Yep. He said you could drive straight through.
Correct. And from the deer camp, there was direct access to the back of the Avery salvage yard, exactly where the RAV4 was found by Pam Sturm, right? So there was a lot of access to the salvage yard from the deer camp.
As a matter of fact, when Wiegert is interviewing Stephen the day that they arrested him, and he insists that they know how they brought the RAV in, that way that they're talking about is that way right now.
Correct. Yep. And Fassbender and Wiegert told Stephen Avery on November the 9th exactly how the RAV4 came into the property from the deer camp. And remember, Jack 61, remember, guys, what Fassbender said? He goes, "We followed the dog tracks." Isn't that incredible?
Yes. That's right.
Something you want to see on Chris Road at all, or?
So I understand what the scent dogs is. Even your car, they can track it. So those scent dogs were the ones that came in around this way and went to the conveyor road.
They told me exactly the way that their theory was of the way they thought the car came, which was through the field, down Chris Road, past the hunting cap, into the pit, and then through.
Do they think that Avery drove it, do you think?
They didn't say that to me.
Okay, but they knew that the car came off of Avery's property and was brought around. They were claiming through yours,
They told me.
which matches the dog tracks.
Yeah, but what it didn't match is what Brendan said. So they had to change their narrative.
What Brendan said was completely the opposite of what the forensic evidence showed, because Brendan Dassey said that both him and Stephen drove the RAV4 past Mama Avery's house and Chuck Avery's house, past the crusher, and then into the pit area, which is the complete opposite to what the forensic evidence has shown. But did you catch what Josh Redon said? He said that law enforcement told him that they believed that the RAV4 was driven across the cornfield to Cuss Road. Isn't that incredible? That because they followed the dog tracks, they believe that the RAV4 went across the cornfield to Cuss Road.
That's right.
I mean, you'd think that you'd have to have, I don't want to use the word forensic evidence, but you'd think that would leave a trail that would be trackable. You know, with a particular wheelbase and tire tracks.
So. Yeah, one would think so. If you're driving a RAV4 across the cornfield, I'm sure it's going to leave tracks.
Yeah, even whether the corn is cut down or not, right? The stalks are still there. You know, only an inch or so off the ground. They don't completely rip the stalks out of the ground.
Correct. And I don't think they did any analysis on the wheels of the RAV4. They didn't look at the mud. They didn't look for the presence of corn or any type of debris actually on the RAV4 or under the RAV4 to give them a clue as to where it had gone.
So on that map, just so it's clear, even to me, if you Stephen's trailer is sort of the upper left portion of where Avery's Auto Salvage is, right? Up there we go. That's Stephen's trailer, and the cornfield is actually what he sees over, right? So the cornfield is actually up. You look to the cornfield is not the quarry, so the cornfield would be sort of up and over that way. And there's a berm. There's a berm over there too, right? So yeah, I don't see how you could make such a bold claim without like a real kind of statement there. So you know, a real kind of piece of evidence that said, oh yeah, here's the tire tracks. These are the width of the RAV4 wheelbase. It just doesn't make sense to me.
The pelvic bones are not on his property. They're on Manitowoc County's property. He was also told, he thinks by the Wisconsin Department of Justice investigators, that they were very confident that Teresa's car had been on Cuss Road and been driven into the deer camp and then to the conveyor belt road and crossed over into the Avery property. So the thing that's so huge about that disclosure is that's a major Brady violation that was never reported to the defense. Stephen was convicted on a theory that he moved the car from his trailer to the southeast corner of the Avery property without leaving the Avery property. When the prosecution has withheld evidence that would have been favorable to the defense, it's a constitutional violation. It is the violation that is most likely to vacate a conviction. I still believe that whoever got in there with the car had some knowledge of the property, the sand and gravel to enter. But now I don't know if the police maybe are responsible for bringing the car in. And they'd also be responsible for bringing the bones in. I guess the cops just thought Stephen didn't matter. I want them all to know that he matters. That they're going to regret the day they planted the evidence.
You know, the anecdotal evidence suggests that the RAV4 wasn't on the property on November the 4th. Now, that's anecdotal evidence based on a flyover. The detectives and law enforcement in the plane that flew over didn't detect the RAV4. It's highly unlikely that it was hidden somewhere, right? Because when Pam of God found the RAV4 on November the 5th, there were branches and there were other items all around the RAV4. It would have taken a little bit of effort to have placed all those items there in order to sort of like semi-disguise it. But there's no evidence at all that the RAV4 was actually on the property on November the 4th. Also, the fact that Earl and Chuck and other members of the public could have potentially gone around that area in the pit, and no one ever recalls seeing a fairly newish looking RAV4. So the question is this: if the RAV4 came from the deer camp area or the quarry area and got planted and was there on November the 5th, just not talking about Tom Sawinski for the time being, the question is, where was the RAV4? Where was the RAV4 stowed and hidden for someone, a planter, to put it on the property on November the 5th? Very likely in the very early hours of the morning, because the evidence, the dog tracks, tends to suggest that RAV4 came through the quarry area. So my big question is, where was the RAV4 stowed until it got placed on the property?
Yeah, I have to agree. And you know, I personally think that if there was even a whiff of that RAV sitting there on the pre-November 5, Kratz would have had a parade over it, and the rest of the prosecution. They would have upplayed that and trying to throw all their weight behind it to say, look, see, that RAV's been sitting there for days. They didn't have anything. I mean, I didn't see any. Some people think that there's a hint of that RAV4 in the flyover, but I'm sorry, I don't see it. I just don't.
Yeah,
I mean, I'd like to see the unedited.
McGilla's post, right? From a while ago. He did some pretty advanced image processing. I wouldn't say it's definitive. I mean, that could be there could be a lot of reasons why you see something like that there, but you'd think that's it's obvious that they flew over for 4 hours, right? They flew around for 4 hours, and we have literally 3 minutes of that. So, and it's obvious they're trying to hide something. For what reason? I don't know.
Well, 100% correct, Big Jeff. But think about it, right? Say if they actually flew over that area in the pit, right? And they were flying quite low, and they had definitive footage that showed no RAV4. Do you think they want to remove that from the footage, Big Jeff, guys?
I do.
It's a bit like the Zapruder film, right? Cut out what hurts.
Right.
So you can't tell me that these guys flew up in the air for hours and hours and hours, and we've only got a couple of minutes of footage. It's clearly been spliced, in my opinion.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
Definitely been spliced, but I'm not quite confident that the RAV not being there would have hurt them regardless. I know in a hindsight sense it kind of does now, because Brendan in one of his one of 7 statements, which we all know is just all based on bullshit because of what they were feeding him, that he says that they drove the RAV down there, they put the RAV in the location it was found, so we should be expecting to see it in the flyover, because he says it should have been there for that whole time. However, when you go back and really read their lining of questioning, and I've been doing that lately, is just going back and just trying to see all their leading questions to the family and this, like the third parties and stuff, the information they were getting, because I wanted to see what they were. You can actually kind of see what law enforcement are thinking when you go back and look at their leading questions, because they're thinking something, and then they're trying to get the answers to what their line of narrative is going. And what I'm finding is, I think they were setting up a narrative where they were trying to put that Teresa's Holbach's car wouldn't have been seen. It could not have been seen because it was hidden by Stephen, possibly in his garage, for a numerous amount of days. That's why they keep going back and talking about the Suzuki. Why? When was it pushed out? How long had you seen it on the side of the garage? Who pushed it in? And you see them asking every single person. They keep going back. And I think that was because they were trying to find, they knew that that RAV would not have fitted in there with all the other content that was in there. Like, you have the snowmobile, you had the Suzuki, you had all that rubbish. They knew that something had to have been taken out for it to just fit in. And I think that's what they were trying to do. So in a sense, I don't think that if you would have seen it in the flyover early back then, that it would have made anything. They would have just then turned around and said, still was on the property. It was just hidden in his garage, because we have witnesses saying that the Suzuki was in and out of that garage for that certain amount of time, and that's when it was placed in there. Just something to think about. Of course, we don't know, but I think that when you look at all the law enforcement's lining of questioning, they kind of give things away as well.
I agree with you, Kelly. They would have changed the narrative to suit, right? So they can't, under no circumstances can the state ever admit that that RAV4 was off the property, right? So they would have changed and adopted the narrative to suit. So, okay, the flyover didn't find it. It meant that Stephen probably had it in a garage or under a tarp or something like that. But then it really doesn't make any sense, because if the state's narrative all along has been, well, Stephen's intention was to crush the RAV, right? If that was really his intention to crush the RAV, one, how was he going to do it without his brothers noticing it? Because all the vehicles are logged that are crushed, because the crusher is not owned by the Avery salvage yard. It's owned by a third party. And secondly, it's going to make a lot of noise, right? And Chuck and Earl, and I believe even Stephen, said that if you're going to crush a vehicle, there are certain parts that you have to remove from the vehicle before you crush it. So hence, when exactly was Stephen going to find the time to come and crush the vehicle? And why would he go to Crivets? You know, honestly, to leave the biggest clue on the property really doesn't make any sense at all. But I do agree with Kelly. The state would have changed the narrative to suit.
And, as far as the flower video, don't forget about the undocumented video that we've never seen.
The one they can't get to play.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, I think they have that service that starts to get advertised around Christmas time. Take your old technology and have it transferred onto new digital USB drive, so it's nice and updated for you. So, if we really need to put Wiegert in touch with one of these companies to forensically retrieve these files, I'm sure we could introduce them to someone, Jack.
If I could just make another point, Kelly is very, very correct. And she made a very important point, and it all revolves around that Suzuki. Because quite clearly, if the Suzuki and the snowmobile were in the garage, then the narrative that Brendan said, oh yeah, we backed in the RAV4, Teresa's RAV4, could not possibly be true. Because there's no way that you can fit a RAV4 and the other vehicles in that garage. Remember, guys, the garage was very, very messy. And so forensically, they never proved that the RAV4 was in there. Hell, they can't even prove that Teresa Hallbach was in there, apart from Ida Meffel. And we know that Ida Meffel is dodgy as all hell. So it's very interesting. And apparently the Suzuki had a broken gearbox, so it couldn't be driven out, it had to be pushed out. Now, if you look at all the pictures, and Jack 61 will back me up, there's a lot of stuff in that Suzuki, in the Suzuki, and on top of the Suzuki. So no one had made any comment from law enforcement that that Suzuki had moved from that garage. But Kelly's correct. They asked everyone, oh, what can you tell me about the Suzuki? Where was it? Was it on the side of the garage? Was it out of the garage? Was it in the garage? And you know what? You get conflicting statements. There's no definitively correct statement.
Hey, so Link and Remaker are there on Thursday at Steven's trailer. And they asked Steven if they can come take a look around. And this was, and Steven was sort of, tipped off, if you will, that there was police interest by the just fact that Coburn had showed up the night before on Wednesday, right? And he didn't go near the trailer, right? But he was down at Moss. So Steven knows the police are interested here. Remaker and Link show up. Do you think they should have asked, as the genius law enforcement agents that they are? Oh, do you mind if we take a look in the garage too? So are we arguing the RAV4 was there then? I think that it's just hard to believe that after being tipped off that Steven would have left that thing in the garage for any amount of time. You would have been very nervous about. I can't imagine. That literally Link and Remaker were, 10 feet, 15 feet from the RAV4 as they were making their way in the house. It's not believable to me that he had left it there.
Correct, 100% correct. But the argument will be, Big Jeff, okay, what happened on October the 31st? That's the critical date. So the question would have to be asked, on October the 31st, was the Suzuki and the snowmobile in the garage? Yes or no? And the second question is, was Teresa Hallbach and her RAV4 ever in the garage on October the 31st, right? Now, obviously, no one that I know of has said, apart from Brendan Dassey, that Teresa and her RAV4 were in that garage. Forensically, there's no proof. But if that Suzuki and the snowmobile were in there on October the 31st, guys, you can see that completely changes the narrative, because it means that they couldn't have shot Teresa Hallbach and then placed her in her own RAV4 in the garage, right? So the only person who said they backed up the RAV4 in the garage is Brendan. And Brendan is the one that told them the story that both him and his uncle drove the RAV past Mama Avery's house and Chuck Avery's house to the pit. No one saw it, no one heard it. So you can see it is inconsistent with the dog tracks and all the forensic evidence. So hence, if you can basically destroy Brendan Dassey's narrative, and remember, he recanted, then what case has the state got? It's a very, very tenuous one.
Yeah, so just to clarify, if the flyover reveals no RAV in the lot, and a search of Steven's garage had removed the possibility, by Link and Remaker, which they did not do. I'm not saying they did it, on Thursday, then where is it? I think that was what you originally brought, and that's what I was trying to corroborate. So I agree with everything you said, and it's just it's a mystery. So anyway,
yeah, but it makes the matters worse, because you've got anecdotal evidence that the RAV4 was at the turnaround, right?
That's right.
Near Scott Tadich's property. And then, of course, you got Tom Sawinski. Now, I'm not saying Tom Sawinski's observation is correct or incorrect, But then you've got Tom Sawinski's observation of seeing, he named Bobby Dassey and Santa as well, the guy with the longer grey beard, as having their hands on the RAV4 pushing it down Avery Road. And you would think that that was damning. But remember what Josh Kaur and Lisa Kumfer wrote, Jack 61? Oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if Bobby Dassey was pushing the RAV. It just meant that Stephen Avery made him.
Yeah, doesn't mean he didn't kill that. Avery didn't kill her.
That's 100% correct, and that exemplifies what Kelly has been arguing all along. No matter what scenario there is, the state will try and put it into their favor. And in actual fact, they even said that, oh, who cares about what the observation with the RAV4 at the turnaround? How do we know that Stephen didn't drive the RAV4 there and then went and picked it up? So no matter all this anecdotal evidence to suggest that the RAV4 was off the property, the state actually don't care. They have diffused it. It's incredible, guys.
Yeah, the problem really here in my mind is, that the court is allowing the prosecution to draw conclusions that should be made by the jury. I think you're right. I mean, Kelly brings this up brilliantly every single time, that she said they're just going to say this. And I get mad at Kelly because I say, you shouldn't, that's not something that's not a conclusion that the court should be allowed to come to. That's a decision that should be left to the jury. But again and again and again, Kelly's right, and the judge allows the prosecution of the state to get away with drawing these conclusions that just aren't right. They're should not be allowable for them to draw. Certain observations need to be rendered by a jury, not by not just, oh yeah, that didn't matter. That doesn't explain anything. So I just don't, I guess you're not a lawyer so you get what you pay for. But if there's these things that come up that would draw, conclusions, how can you definitively prove that any minds would be changed? You can say, well, this is enough to change the minds. And how many minds you need to change the verdict? One. Right, because it has to be unanimous. Right. So I mean, correct. I don't understand. Not being a lawyer, I'm penalized, but just trying to be a reasonable person. Somebody pushing the RAV on November 4th onto the Avery salvage yard, it explodes the entire state's narrative in my mind. I can't see how you can just jump to some conclusion that it doesn't really matter because the jury would have found him guilty anyway, even faced with that new evidence. I'm just not buying. It's not a reasonable conclusion to me. Correct.
But basically what they're doing is they're playing Nostradamus. They're making a prediction. They're making a prediction of what the jury is going to conclude, as well as a judge. So they clearly do not want Kathleen Zellner in front of a judge and a jury. So they're trying to make it so ridiculous. Oh, look, don't worry about the RAV. Don't worry about what Ramlow saw. Don't worry about what Siebert saw. Don't even worry about what Tom Sawinski saw. It's trivial. Stephen could have still done it. And that's exactly the line that they used, right, guys? With the bones in the Manitowoc County gravel pit. Their argument was, okay, so if they were found to be Teresa Hallbach's bones, how do we know that it wasn't Stephen that placed them there? So no matter how ridiculous the argument is, they've always got a get out clause. They're blaming Stephen for everything. And that's what Kathleen Zellner has to overcome, that tirade of commentary by the state saying Stephen did everything. No matter what occurred, no matter who observed what, it's all Stephen's fault.
Yeah, just a little bit on to that. You guys are right what you guys are saying in terms of what their excuses, but the sad truth is the Courts of Appeal in 2021 actually backed them up. They also came to the conclusion, an opinion is that like Dr. Silkman said, in terms of Kathleen's burden of saying, it wasn't my client, they're saying you have not proven that it was always going to be, that was always part of that. It could have still been Stephen, and at no stage has Kathleen provided anything that eliminates him. And at this stage, that's what they're kind of asking for. Proving who else it could have been is a bonus, but they're saying to her, your one and only burden really is just to show that your client didn't, and you haven't reached that bar for us even yet. In terms of what you were saying, Big Jeff, and I know you say that you get angry at me for saying things, and that's fair, and I don't like to be the person that does it.
But you're always right is the problem. That's what really is making me mad.
You guys were hitting the points, and I think one of you might have even said it, but what they're doing, when you read the state's reply, what they were doing is they're trying to get the state, and I agree that this is why we want an evidentiary hearing, is because you can't stop coming to the conclusions and arguing it for what it is. Like, let's get to there and have that discussion. But what they're trying to do is they're saying to the judge, the whole point, all the points that Kathleen is bringing up, to have a Brady, to have a Denny, it has to be, is this new information, if it was, would it have changed the outcome? Would it have been heard in a courtroom? And majority of it is, well, at this stage, I think we're all on the same page that, yeah, it would be interesting if this would have been there, and you can't just assume what the outcome would have been. But what they're essentially doing is, and it's the legal right for them to do it, is they're then saying you can't just make a ruling based on this new evidence. This new evidence has to be able to fit into, if would it have been heard in the then, and could it have changed the outcome? But then it is the totality. The word is the totality of the case. So they're saying, could it have maybe been heard? Yeah, maybe it could have. But regardless, Judge, the totality is that wouldn't have freed him when there was another 16 other experts that were contesting against that actually puts Teresa still in the residence. Or the forensic, and they hit more on this one, or the forensic evidence that was against Stephen. Kathleen addresses the RAV and she addresses the blood, but she's ignored the fact that there's item FL, that there's the hood latch, that there's all these other factors that she hasn't been able to give us, how Bobby Dassey had done the rest. So the key word for them, and that they're hiding behind, is the word totality. The totality of the entirety of the case and what is bring forward. And that is what they're going to continually hide behind, is you can look at all this at face value, and yeah, it might have altered some of the avenues, but in the reality of it, is Tom Skowinski bigger than the DNA? That's what they're asking, because the blood. That's exactly that's what they're asking. Is Tom Skowinski as a witness bigger than the blood? I'm not going to give my opinion, because that's not, well, we all know my opinion. The answer for me is no, but that is what they're basically saying to the judge. That's the decision she has to, do we give a hearing based on that, or do we kind of just accept that, yes, Tom would have been interesting on the stand, he might have made a few waves, but the totality is his testimony would not have been bigger than the blood, than the DNA.
Yeah, 100% agree. And it's totality and preponderance of evidence. So in other words, even if there were oddities, things didn't quite match up to what the state said, the state scenario, at the end of the day, they would have said, look, Judge, we've got Teresa's RAV4 here, and in that RAV4, the only person's DNA we found belongs to Stephen Avery. Now, it doesn't mean he killed her. There could have been and I put in quotation, an innocent explanation of why his blood, or possibly even the hood latch DNA, got there, etc., etc. However, how does he explain it? Why is his blood in that RAV4? Why is his touch DNA on the hood latch? Now, we know that there's a whole mountain of problems, but the way Kelly presented it is correct. That's exactly the way the state would see it. That's the way a judge would see it. Because remember when Laura Nyrider went in front of the en banc, I think on the second occasion, and the judge, one of the judges said to her, "Oh, so why did they need to bring in Brendan Dassey? Did they need 2 killers?" And she just could not answer the question. She was stumped. So these are the real hard, tough questions that would be asked, right? So remember, guys, remember what Ken Kratz did in court. He even said, don't worry about the key, right, Jack 61? He's even conceding that the key was planted. But at the end of the day, it's the preponderance and totality of evidence that looks bad for Stephen. And guys, you will agree with me. There's no test for planting. Bang, checkmate.
But it is that time that we have to head on over to Big Jeff for the wrap-up comments. And Jeff, today we went to the deer camp. We did a little bit in Redance. We talked about the fire. A lot going on. Give us your extended, I guess, wrap-up comment.
Well, to me, when I think about the 8 minutes that we just saw of the episode, it really was Kathleen Zellner at her finest. And the guilters love to rag on Kathleen Zellner. But you see in this episode, especially in this small microcosm of the full episode, you see Kathleen Zellner sort of in her full mental faculties, ferreting out an important piece of information from Joshua Dunn. Yeah, the cops were actively trying to make me look bigger, and you see her. She hasn't formed her full theory yet, obviously, as this is happening, because she said, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's this. And you see that, not only is she a person who is taking the time, she's all in on this, right? She is the number one wrongful conviction attorney in the country, maybe even in the world. She is taking the time and the money, because she's putting all this money up herself to go to the Avery salvage yard to interview the people herself, and try and get her mind about what went around. She's convinced of Stephen's innocence. And when you hear things like what Redant just got saying, it makes it sound, just like the people on this panel probably think that the fix was really in. Why are the police trying to get Redant to change his story? Because they felt their narrative was so thin, they needed it amplified. That's why. And they actually did it. That's unethical, right? That's not ethical behavior by the police. So you can say, well, maybe I don't think they planted that evidence, but we know from what Redant just said that for sure they acted unethically. Maybe that's not enough to get Stephen and Brendan out, but it's sure enough to watch this documentary and know what we're up against with regard to whether or not we think the people involved in this on the law enforcement side were ethical, principled people or not. And from what we just heard from Redant, we know the answer to that. So I think we got a lot of information out of this 8 minutes. The integrity of Kathleen Zellner, sort of her the mental process of Kathleen Zellner, the integrity of Kathleen Zellner, how she's a human, because she was kind of breaking down at the end when she said she's going to show the world, or they're going to teach them that Stephen does matter. I mean, she was breaking down a little bit when she was doing that. So I mean, really, in my mind, we learned a lot, and those are the things that we learned. So before I bring this to 2 hours, I'm going to hand it off to the next.
Thank you, Big Jeff. I do agree. The fix was in. I think Jack will back me up on that one, Jack. The fix was in. I know that you like to see this list of people who decided not to be in MAM, so I left it up there for you, Jack.
Yeah, absolutely. It does seem like, and well, it actually is more than seem like. It's the fact that there were certain things done at trial that it just was okay. For a prosecutor to get up and ask the jury to forget about the key, the cops were just helping out. Come on, it doesn't really matter. That doesn't affect the integrity of the case, guys. And Willis doesn't bat an eyelash. I mean, he's a juror. He is the main jurist. Why his hair wasn't on fire at the same time is, I think that's indicative in showing really that they wanted Avery to be the guy. I'm not saying Willis is necessarily a bad judge, but maybe he's not in comparison to some others. But I think that he is. I think he missed a real opportunity there. Yeah, this list is interesting if you read through it. All the people that said, nope. There's Peg was still alive then. Her name's on here. The coroner, Glazer, Sunshine Christine has gotten some interesting information from him. The photos that a lot of them that we didn't have before had never been released. Remaker, Rodant, Pliska.
Mike
I'd like to have heard from her.
He didn't like.
Yep. So it's an interesting list. So yeah, and a very interesting episode, talking about Kathleen talking to Josh Rodant and that interaction there with his lawyer. So yeah, interesting wrap up here on the end of this episode. And as Big Jeff says, on to the next.
Thank you. To the next, Jack, for sure. Dr. Silkman, guess what? We finished another episode.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. It just goes to show the breadth and depth of the knowledge of the panel that we have here. That episode only went for 8 minutes, but we spent well over an hour in discussion, and we could have spent many more hours. Just to briefly wrap up, I really did enjoy this section here. I really am very impressed with Kathleen Zellner. I believe that Kathleen Zellner has exposed the shenanigans and utter desperation by the state and by the investigators. Now, if Kathleen Zellner, all those years later, can ask the right questions, can talk to the right people, uncover shenanigans, uncover important forensic evidence, it begs the question, why wasn't that done back in 2005? That's a rhetorical question. We already know the answer. To me, what stood out is the utter garbage by Fassbender and Wiegert. They had to have known that Brendan Dassey was completely clueless about the how the RAV4 got to the pit. All the forensic evidence pointed to the fact that the RAV4 came from Cuss Road, the deer camp, and went up the conveyor road and got dumped in the pit. That's the complete opposite to where Brendan Dassey said that the RAV4 came from. Fassbender and Wiegert had to have known that Brendan was lying. And it's looking at all these little gems that Kathleen Zellner and her researchers have teased out are just fantastic. And one learns all the time. Thank you very much. And hopefully everyone enjoyed it in chat.
Thank you, Dr. Silkman. Appreciate those comments. Of course, Kelly, if you wouldn't lead us out of episode 18.
As usual, it was great to have a great discussion with the panel. In terms of this episode, I think the gentlemen before me have nicely wrapped up the comments on the whole what we were pointing to. I don't really have anything else to add in this one. Just on to the next, and thanks for joining with us.
Yep, sometimes we got to be short and sweet and get on to the next. Our motto here around discussing a murderer. So we'll be on to the next shortly. We'll see you guys all next week for another episode. So for Big Jeff and Jack and Dr. Silkman and Kel, this is Jeff Jones saying this has been Discussing a Murderer.